Persuasion or coercion. If your boss tells you his or her fiance is out of town and asks you to go out to a romantic restaurant after work to discuss your career potential, is that persuasion or coercion? If a child asks their parent for a new toy and screams until they get it, is that persuasion or coercion? Coercion occurs when the influence agent either delivers a threat of some consequence, attempts to induce the individual to act contrary to their preferences, or deprives the individual of some measure of freedom or autonomy. Coercion is not persuasion. Remember, persuasion occurs in an atmosphere of free choice and assumes the individual is capable of resisting an influence attempt or willingly persuaded him or herself to change his or her mind about a particular issue. What examples can you think of for the following communication effects? Shaping, reinforcing, and changing responses. Shaping is where your target audience is coming up with new ideas. Reinforcing is where you're reinforcing existing ideas they've already claimed or they've already made their own, and you're just reinforcing those decisions or that decision-making process. Changing responses is where you take a formed idea and you try to change it. You try to change their mind. So, for example, it would be reinforcing if I am trying to convince a buyer to buy a car they've already self-persuaded themselves to buy. It would be changing responses if I was trying to persuade that same buyer to buy a different car. They want to buy a car, but it's a different car than they originally had in their mind, and that's how I'm trying to change the response. And of course, shaping would be if they had no idea at all, they didn't want to buy a car at all. And I wanted them to have the new idea of, I want to buy a car. Argumentation and persuasion. Rhetoricians largely use the lens of argumentation to study persuasion. Rhetoricians are also referred to as humanists or interpretivists. They're the opposite of the objectivists or the social scientists. They're part of the same discipline, but they get to play in different sandboxes. Social scientists largely use the lens of persuasion to study persuasion, so they call it persuasion, where rhetoricians usually call it argumentation. Since our text favors social science, we use the word persuasion, and most of our supplemental materials will favor argumentation. Contemporary overview. The study of persuasion is a multidisciplinary discussion, but it largely falls into the social scientists. So a lot of the research comes not only from communication, but also social psychology and other social scientists. Researchers use a scientific approach, for example, surveys or experiments. Contemporary persuasion differs from the past. The number of persuasive communications has grown exponentially. Persuasive messages travel faster than ever before. Persuasion has become institutionalized. Persuasive communication has become more subtle and devious. Persuasive communication is more complex and impersonal. Let's address that first one. The number of persuasive communications has grown exponentially. Consider just Facebook and the emergence of social media. That's just one of a huge number of exploding communication platforms that are new thanks to the digital age. All those different methods, all those different channels are ways that we persuade and we are persuaded by. They're modes of influence. Persuasive messages travel faster than ever before. Regardless of the channel that you've chosen to get your news or information, be it email, social media networks, television. It's much quicker than it ever has been before. Persuasion has become institutionalized. Whether it be Madison Avenue trying to persuade you to adopt a new product or lifestyle choice, or political campaigns trying to convince you to vote a certain way, or other private industries that want you to support them for one reason or another. Persuasion communication has become more subtle and devious. We've come a long way from the snake oil salesman that justified the creation of the FDA, for example. But persuasive communication has become more subtle and devious in part because we have become better consumers of media messages. Persuasive communication has become more complex and impersonal. Social media alone has so many different methods of influence. These methods are becoming more and more impersonal as we find ourselves sitting behind different screens, be it mobile, computer, or television. These screens create an impersonal view of persuasive communication. Persuasion can be used for good or bad purposes, with ethical or unethical intentions. The intentions are the driving factor behind what makes persuasion ethical or unethical. Consider this scenario. You're a car salesperson and you have a family at home to support. Times are tough. Is it ethical for you to attempt to persuade someone who can barely afford the payments to purchase a new car? So here's where we've been. What is persuasion? How does contemporary persuasion differ from the past? Be sure you're able to explain ethos, logos, and pathos. What's the difference between persuasion and coercion? And what are 3 persuasive communication effects? And we discussed the difference between persuasion and argumentation, and how this course and this book favors the social scientific method. So we'll have supplemental materials that deal more with the argumentation perspective of our rhetoricians.